This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders, sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress. With your host, Dr. Noreen Golfman, former provost and vice president academic at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, and inaugural member of Studiosity's Academic Advisory Board in Canada. We collectively recognize that this podcast's hosts and guests have recorded this interview from across Turtle Island on the unceded and traditional territories of many nations in what we now know as Canada. We acknowledge past and current custodians of this land.
Welcome, everybody. I hope there's a interesting audience out there. There usually is for these podcasts. I'm the host today, Noreen Golfman. I'm situated in St. John's, Newfoundland, at one side of the continent. And my interview subject today, or fellow podcaster here, is situated on the other side of the continent. And thank you so much, Dr. Joy Johnston, for joining us. She is Simon Fraser University's 10th president and vice-chancellor. And she stepped into the role of president after 6 years at SFU's vice president, research and international. And after a long career, ongoing, of course, in academia, research and innovation. And I should, I guess, disclose I'm a recovering senior administrator, formerly provost and vice president academic at Memorial University, now retired, and I'm on the Canadian Advisory Board of Studiosity that's hosting this podcast. So once again, thanks so much for taking time. I'm sure you've got a busy schedule, even in early summer. I know a president's work is pretty consuming.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Noreen. I have to say, you're right. I think there used to be a time when things slowed down over the summer, but no more, that's for sure.
I'm sure not.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, we tend to ask presidents and vice presidents a set of questions, but we can, move through however the conversation goes and go in any tangent our heart's desire. But I'd like to begin by asking if you have with you or you have in mind an object. One might actually, call it a fetish object that one carries through one's career through various administrative offices, maybe even into classrooms, that's become a kind of token or sign of how you see yourself or how you have seen yourself in your roles. And is there something that comes to mind?
It's such a good question, Noreen. I have to be truthful, and maybe I do want to begin by acknowledging I'm out here on Burnaby Mountain. That's where our main campus is for Simon Fraser University, and we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam people. And I just feel it's important for me to acknowledge the lands. We're so lucky to have great relationships with our host nations, and really want to acknowledge how privileged we are to have our Burnaby campus on these lands. And we're working hard on truth and reconciliation. You asked me about a token of some kind, and I have to say the answer really is no. And in part, it's so interesting because I'm one of these people who can't even keep a pen. I'm always, leaving it behind. I just don't seem to pay attention to those little details in my life. So that being said, I also steal pens on a regular basis. I pick them up
to say, what's a pen? But
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyhow, it is interesting. I have to say for myself, at least, probably physical objects have not been the important touch points. Probably some of the other values and other lessons that I've learned along the way are probably the more important touch points for me. So that's really what I reflect on more than anything.
Sure. I think you're the first person I've talked to that didn't have something immediately come to mind, which is interesting in itself. But I'm sure we'll speak about those values or let's say signifiers you've taken along with you from year to year. And so my first real question is really about your university experience, undergrad, grad, how do you reflect on it? Or is it even still fresh in some ways, or has it been reframed for you as you've advanced through your own career?
Yeah, I loved being a student. Maybe I'll start there. Um, I finished high school when I was 16 and went right into university. And I made a choice to go in and do my degree in nursing. It was a good choice for me, in part because I was young and it was a fairly structured program. And I really wanted to be a nurse. My mother had been a nurse and I was really passionate about healthcare. But it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I participated in university life. I enjoyed the practicality of the education, but also the more theoretical elements as well. And had fantastic professors, enjoyed courses outside of my healthcare courses as well. Everything from music appreciation to literature to history to English. Loved all of those things as well. And graduated from UBC with my degree in nursing and was really proud of the degree. It set me off on a course to have a career in nursing, which I followed for a number of years, for 5 years before I went back to graduate school. And I loved being a nurse, I have to say. It was a privilege, but also hard work, as you can well appreciate. And I was a nurse at a time in the early 1980s when the HIV/AIDS epidemic was just coming to the fore. And I worked at St. Paul's Hospital, where some of the first AIDS patients were being treated. And it was a very hard time because people didn't understand what was happening with the virus. And in part because of that, but other experiences, I decided I want to go back to graduate school. And I thought maybe I'd take on a leadership role with a master's degree, but I went to the University of Alberta and did a master's degree and really got the research bug at that point and stayed on and did my PhD. And I loved graduate school. As much as I loved undergraduate, graduate school was even better. I think partly you're really following your passions in a different way. I think for me, I really loved the research experience and really learning different modes of inquiry. I began to understand the power of academia and saw myself following a career in academia, having been exposed again to fantastic professors. And I got involved in student government there as well, our graduate student society, and so had that experience and
Mhm.
just really thrived and loved it. And was lucky enough after graduating with my PhD to get a faculty position back at UBC, and so returned to Vancouver at that time. But I would say I was very privileged. I had great financial support as a graduate student. That was very important. And actually as an undergraduate as well. And was exposed to great ideas, great people, and really it was inspiring. Probably, some of the best years of my life, I have to say.
That's great to hear. It strikes me, I could be wrong, but that there weren't that many PhDs in nursing in the 80s. Am I right?
That's correct. So when I went to the University of Alberta, they did not have there were no PhD programs in nursing in Canada. And when I was in my master's program, a bunch of graduate students, myself included, started to lobby the
Uh,
provincial government to fund a PhD program in nursing at the University of Alberta. And it was fun. It was another kind of whole learning experience to put a case together, to lobby, to put data together around. There were a number of PhD programs in nursing in the United States at that time, but not in Canada. And now we see a number across Canada. I was among the first three to be led into the PhD program, and as a quote special case.
how so? What was special?
Well, they didn't have the funded program. They decided they would take three of us and kind of develop a program around us and continue to push the government for funding. And that basically worked, which was fantastic. So yeah, it was a heady time.
That's exciting.
It was
Yeah.
very exciting to be part of something new and
Yeah.
new for Canada as well, which was great.
I was going to say, I wonder whether that kind of thing would happen today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, here I am at Simon Fraser University, and we're launching a medical school.
That's
Um,
right. That's
and
right.
Which is interesting. I think what's different is that the motivation for the medical schools really come from the provincial government and the need for more primary care providers.
Sure.
So not pull from students or faculty, but really a push from government to really try to expand medical education, which is interesting.
Yeah. No, absolutely timely. But it's a big deal. It's a big, all the infrastructure, everything that I'm sure you're overseeing and the funding and,
Yeah, it's a big
but
deal. Yeah,
it's exciting. That's
it is
exciting.
exciting. Yeah, but yeah, it's a lot to mount a new medical program. As you said, you can't enroll a student until you have a lot planned and your accreditation in hand. And so we're working very quickly to move forward,
Sure.
to hire, to get the accreditation, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Um, you said you were involved with the Graduate Society, I guess the Nursing Society.
No, the overall university
Okay, so
graduate student society. Yeah.
that speaks to, you know, perhaps innate leadership qualities, or how did you find yourself, involved in that? And I asked because I had a similar path, and one wonders, it's that our leaders born or made or some combination of them, but it takes a certain set of skills or leadership inclinations, seems to me, when you're in grad school to be stepping into that role.
Yeah, it's interesting. I became quite curious about the university as a whole. When I was an undergraduate, I don't think I could have named who the president of UBC.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
administration is quite, you're doing your thing. You relate more to your department or your school or your faculty than you do to the university as a whole. And I didn't understand the university and how it operated. And once I became a graduate student, I started to become more curious about that. And the Graduate Student Society really provided a mechanism to begin to understand in a bigger way the role of the faculty of grad studies, but also the role of grad students within the university and really how the university operated. And we had a fantastic, I really loved it too. We had a fantastic chair of the Graduate Student Society who was doing his PhD in philosophy. And
Ah,
he really understood Robert's rules, not from a rule standpoint, but behind the principle of the minority voice being heard within debate and conversation. And I just remember that to this day. I still hold on to lessons I learned from him as I chair Senate and other meetings myself, because it really, I learned a lot about
yeah.
how to chair and what the principles are, not the rules, but really the principles.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I wonder what he's doing today.
Yeah, I don't know. I lost track of him. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. No, for sure. I mean, I share that same kind of illumination or interest or inspiration in how the machine worked.
Mm.
Wanted to know how everything fit into everything else in an institutional environment like that. And it's interesting that that happens. So it doesn't happen to everybody, but there's a line of continuity between that experience and you sitting in the president's office today, no doubt.
Yeah,
Part of that curiosity.
I agree. I think actually for leaders, I agree. I think it's really an important quality of a leader to be curious and to
Yeah.
want to continue to learn and take on new information, new insights. Yeah.
Yeah, and to have the capacity to let other voices be heard, and like you acquire that authority and power and capacity to do that, which is so hugely important. What would you say has been important to you as an educator, either as a professor, or I don't know whether one still calls oneself an educator as a president of the university. I guess you still are. It's a different hat,
Yeah.
uh, a different orientation to the institution. But what was important to you as an educator?
Well, I think in part, and it just kind of picking up on the thread we just talked about, I think it's really important as an educator. I think that we stand to learn as much from our students as they do from us sometimes. And we need to create those opportunities for them to take their knowledge, their understandings, and contribute into the classroom. And not just be, to receive information. I think that's, to me, really important, is that kind of dynamic learning experience was really important to me. I often say today that important learning happens outside the classroom as much as inside the classroom. And that's through work integrated learning, lifelong learning, co-op experiences, but it's also the hallway conversations. It's the office hours. It's really being around and listening and engaging in broader ways. And that was always really important for me as a professor, to be kind of grounded in that way and attentive to the needs of students. I think, and to, I think the other thing is to remain current. I mean, that sounds kind of obvious, but
Yeah.
I think it's really is a challenge for professors. I think often, you graduate and you start to kind of teach what you were taught, and you end up in that kind of dynamic of really quite easily being stale in your insights, in your perspectives, et cetera. So I think that's the other thing I really worked hard at, was continuing to learn, to challenge myself, to make sure that I was kind of holding up my own responsibilities as an academic, which was very important to me as well.
I guess it would be two-pronged for you, and as it is for most professors, in that being current means also attending to where we think our students are living, not just in terms of professional standards of nursing or healthcare, but that's important, of course, keeping up to date with the research and practices. But that challenge that's in some ways easier if one applies oneself, but easier than feeling comfortable or understanding where students are,
Yeah.
as we get older and they stay the same age.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's such a good point. And, I mean, I've believed this about myself, but I also think, I hope for our students as well, that we can show up to our work, to our learning experiences as our authentic selves, and not have to hide who we are, where we came from, and what our experience has been, that we can use them as assets. And that's not always been the case. I think, the university environment has been very challenging for some individuals from particular backgrounds. If they're, a first-time university goer for a family, for students who might come from backgrounds where they might not feel as welcome within the context of the university. I think that in particular, and that is the role of a professor in the classroom, is to create an environment where people feel welcome, where they feel they can engage with one another, and challenge one another as well, absolutely, but do so in a respectful way.
Did you teach very large classes or?
Yeah, I did a variety. I taught some first year classes that were large, and then later on I tended to teach more graduate students. But I enjoyed the large classes as well. I
Yeah.
mean, I like the theater of it in a way, trying to keep attention, trying to keep mixing things up a little bit. That was fun. I'm not kind of I do think it's important, no matter what size of class we're teaching, to think about ways to really remain, to continue to engage students though in their learning. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite different experiences, but I too, I enjoyed any size. There was different kind of challenge, different kind of performance. You
Mhm.
must have had significant, as we all do, mentors or role models. Were they largely women because of nursing, or was it a diverse group of people who influenced you?
I would say there's a diverse group of people. I'm one of these, I guess over the years, so for example, in my graduate work, I was exposed to mostly professors who were women. They were fantastic. I did my postdoc work with Larry Green, who was a health promotion expert, and loved working with him and took certain lessons from him. And I've kind of been like that, kind of gathering. I gather bits along the way, kind of like my pens. But I love observing what's really working for people, and how they engage and how they move, move things along. And I remember, so for example, I remember sitting, I was on the the board representing the scientists on this health research committee, the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research. And I had a colleague there who was a deputy minister of health. I knew her fairly well, and I knew her personally, but I'd never seen her in a meeting. And I remember going to this meeting, and she was at the meeting, and I just observed how she was just so much like she was in our personal interactions: fun, smart, engaged, but just still herself, and not needing to be super formal, not needing to, kind of, command, control, any of those things. And I remember that being a very important lesson for me, that it is really important to be yourself. That leadership is not something you put on. It's actually really thinking about the ways in which you use your own assets, and think about how you can be, I guess, an authentic leader, using the skills, capacities that you have. Because I think for women in particular, I think often there's this thought of a need to, fit a particular mold or be a particular way. And I think that's such a huge mistake, because we've seen this more and more over the last years, that women leaders can do so very well when they recognize their own capacities and their own assets and utilize them, I think. So that's another example of a great learning I had.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, and one admires in that the confidence that those inspirations seem to possess. And yeah, I think that's an excellent point, that leadership is not something one puts on. It's one, I mean, one's always conscious of being one,
Yeah.
but
And
that
there's,
doesn't mean you're not authentic,
yeah, there's skills like any other thing. There's skills to learn, right? Absolutely. And so that's very, very important.
Yeah.
But then how they get applied and utilized is, I think, really key. And I think the other thing with all of that, and this, is to reflect on your own leadership, and when you mess up, learn from those mistakes, continue to figure out ways to move on. Because that's also,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I didn't have to reflect so involuntarily so often on the mistakes, but that's human nature.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that, no matter who is in a leadership role, mistakes are made, and it's really how you deal with them that's really the sign of a leader, I think. Yeah.
I so agree. Absolutely. So you must have a lot of thinking about these days, the difference between your experience, obviously largely positive as a student, undergrad and grad, and what life is like for students today. And how do you see the difference or similarities, or what's your sense? I know I'm asking a very general question, but it's unavoidable in some ways, because you're overseeing many students and their experiences. And what comes to mind when you think about that difference between that world you lived and the world they're living now?
Well, there's a few. First of all, we had convocation this past month, and had thousands of students again crossing the stage. But most of those students, the undergraduates, didn't get a high school graduation. So this was an important graduation for them to come and be, in person. And I do think, number one, for me, the remnants of COVID continue to linger in very, very significant ways for young people. And I think we've seen this in the performance of our students at the university, that they've come to the university, particularly in those early as we were coming back into in-person learning, without the same kind of skills and ability to engage in critical discussion, their pro-social skills not as attuned, et cetera. And I do think there are deficits there, and you know, obviously those can be made up for, but that is something certainly that's on my mind. I think we're also living in a moment where there's really a scarcity mentality and a lot of fear, and that I think is concerning. So, you know, in Canada, with our budgets and our inflation being what it is, our housing crisis being what it is, it's I think feels pretty dark for a lot of young people. And I think we need to be compassionate and be thinking about their concerns. I also, you know, and then layer on top of that the climate crisis and, you know, the anxiety that brings as well. It's a tough decade to be being born, to be growing up into, I think.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing, of course, is, and no one can be a president of a university campus in North America without also seeing the way in which protest and conflict is also erupting on our campuses. And I will say on that point, universities have always been a place of protest, and well, they should be. It's a place where people should be able to express themselves. We welcome freedom of expression, academic freedom. I think what's different right now is the level of emotional content in those protests, and the vitriol at times as well is very, very worrisome. So, and an unwillingness to really listen to different viewpoints. So there is that tension, which is creating, I think, a lot of difficulty as well. We've been fairly fortunate at Simon Fraser University. We've had protest disruptions concerning activities, but not the degree of other universities in Canada, or particularly the United States. So that's been good. But I'm very conscious of all of these dynamics playing out right now.
I'm sure you are. I mean, I think it's fair to say, at least in my point of view, that your university has long had the reputation of being a more progressive, open environment for student learning, enviably so, I think, for many of us. So I wonder how much that legacy, that reputation, that culture has made for perhaps less vitriol or less aggression. And I don't know, I'm just thinking aloud here as you're speaking of, as you say, you've been fortunate so far,
Yeah.
given the climate elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case. I mean, SFU was born in the 60s,
Yeah.
university, and we were a place of quite a few protests against the Vietnam War and
Yep.
other issues. A number of issues related to academic freedom got played out in the early days at SFU. And I do think, you know, we had the reputation of being a radical campus. I think, you know, we're hitting our 60th year, and as many people in their 60s tend to do, I think there's a certain, you know, movement away from some of that radical viewpoint.
Sure.
But yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's still, you know, that might be true to some degree, that we have an openness. But that being said, we have a lot of work to do to really help people understand how to have dialogue, how to have productive disagreement, how to create a space for people to engage with one another. One of the learnings I've really thought about, I would say, Noreen, is also the importance of a university remaining neutral. And that's so important in order to protect freedom of expression and academic freedom, is that the administrators can't take a position, because that closes down positions. You want to create a space where it's not for the president or the administration to take a viewpoint. We want our academics to take those viewpoints. And that's been hard.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who would like Joy Johnston to say certain things or make certain declarations. And I can have private viewpoints, but I can't be sharing those at this time. It really is a time to make sure that we are, maintaining that space, I guess, for, for diversity viewpoint at the university. Probably more important now than ever.
Yeah, I'm sure the pressure is great on being compelled to take a position or feeling as if you have to satisfy those voices, but I would agree with you. I think in the long run, that neutral and open, yet open position is probably for the best. I'm wondering what, if any, it's a hard question because you're speaking about the deficits that students are facing in every way. What institutionally can be done besides setting good examples, having open dialogue, but in general for students' well-being? Research, rather survey after survey indicates the decreasing percentage, let's say, of students with well-being, having well-being at university across the board, everywhere. And it's hard. Our counseling centers have grown, more investment. I know we have put into all kinds of units to help give students an opportunity to find accommodation in every way, especially mental health. Is there anything else we should be doing or can be doing? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, you're so right. There is certainly a concern about mental health and students at the university, and we're, just like every other university, continuing increasing our counseling support and other supports for students. I think, for me, and I'm going to go back to this point, the other thing that we need to critically learn, and this is kind of related to something that's come up recently, is when someone disagrees with you, or when you hear something that you feel is offensive, it doesn't mean that you're not safe. It means that you've heard something that you disagree with or find offensive. And what we need to, I think, need to help our students, and actually it's not just our students, all of us do, is to say, I disagree with you, or I find that offensive. And I feel in a way we've lost the capacity to really engage in that way. And if I say that, so I say to you, Noreen, I really disagree. It's not like I'm attacking you. I'm talking about the ideas. And I think that we could equip our students and each other a lot more if we could find new ways to have those dialogues. I'm really interested in dialogue. I'm really interested in how we create conditions where people, again, can feel heard, but also, more than heard, listened to,
Yeah.
and come to consensus decision making in different ways. And I think that can help in so many aspects of life, right? From our relationships, our personal relationships, our peer relationships, our relationships with our families. If we can learn how to, engage, and I think those are tools that universities can really help students work with, and they can benefit their mental health. We know that, but they can also help with so many other aspects of being, critical thinker, an engaged community member, a good citizen as well. So it's not always directly about that additional support. It's about also working these muscles a little bit differently so that we can problem solve and get through these very difficult confrontations that we all experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially as we become more extreme or take hard positions, don't listen that well. I really like what you said about the notion of safe and safety. In some ways, it's the meaning's been evacuated from that term. It's kind of loaded. It's
Yeah.
supposed to cover a lot that it doesn't really serve anymore. So yeah, I think those are very useful observations. If you could change something for students now, what would you do if you could? I suppose in some ways you've already answered the question, but anything in addition
You
to
know,
that?
I mean, I think the challenge for all universities now is to keep galloping along and be thinking about the learning experience for our students and make sure that we are keeping up, that our technology, the resources that we have are creating the best possible learning environments. And I do think we're in a moment right now with artificial intelligence and machine learning where we've got to start galloping. So that's something that's very much on my mind right now, Noreen. I would hope that no student would graduate from university at this time without some kind of understanding of AI and machine learning. These are going to be tools just like the internet was tools. Well, the internet wasn't there when I was a graduate student. I'll be very, very clear to any great degree. But you know, these tools really disrupt. I mean, I think people were freaked out that people would start Google searching for their papers, and now they're worried about, you know, Chat GPT or whatever. But these are tools that we all need to learn to use, and they can make our lives better if we use them responsibly and think about how they can be utilized, etc. So that's
Yeah.
one area that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and both for our learning experiences, but also for the way we do our work at the university as a whole, is to rather than try to resist and control, we need to embrace and figure out how to move forward, because the students are going to move with regardless. We know that.
Absolutely, 100%. No, I'm really glad you brought that up. You know, I've been involved in several conversations about AI and about its usefulness. And importantly, the fact that our students goes back to what I said earlier about our getting older and our students staying the same age, but they're staying the same age with new technologies and new instruments as we move further away from what it is they're practicing. And someone said something really interesting to me the other day, which was that perhaps we should, this technological turn will compel us to listen to our students more actively, to learn from them, because they're way ahead and will be. Talk about galloping. They're really racing towards using the technology in ways that are creative and useful and not necessarily for plagiarism or ill effects or anything like that. So we as educators have a lot to learn from them. And by more directly engaging them and involving them in some co-learning capacity, we will benefit, and the classroom environment will benefit, and learning will benefit. So it seems, again, very obvious, but because this is so new and threatening to so many people, perhaps it needs to be said that we need to let them show us what they're doing with it and teach us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely the case. And you know, it is interesting to have watched. I mean, I think initially and it's really going fast right now. I mean, it's just exponential. So this is really, really important work for universities right now to really be thinking about how it can be incorporated as a tool. And you're right, the students, they know they're the first to learn about what these applications can look like and how to utilize them. So
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're not going to learn as quickly as they are because they're using it. And, yeah. So, Joy, what would you say to your younger self in view of all of these changes and everything you've learned and the ladder you've climbed and all of that? Any advice you would give her? Sounds like she didn't need much advice.
Always need advice. I mean, and I actually kind of always gave myself this advice along the way, and I continue to give it to people who are trying to think about what they want to do with their lives. I mean, number one, no 5-year-old grows up saying, I want to be a university president when I grow up. And so for me, that lesson and to realize, and you want to have your life planned out when you're 22 or whatever, but is to really look for the opportunities and take them as they come. I think that's just so important. And I would say the other thing for me is not to be afraid to apply for jobs that you might not get. I really believe in benchmarking, and I think we know there's very good evidence in the literature that men might feel that they're 95% able or competent to take on a role and they'll apply for it. But women, if they, or no, there'd be 50% competent and will apply for it. And women need to be 95% competent in order to apply. So women will tend to not benchmark, not push up to go into those other roles. And so I think, apply for jobs, apply for position, put yourself out there, run to be on a Senate, or, put your hand up to be an associate dean or dean. And you might not get it, but you'll learn things. And those learnings are so important along the way as well. So those would be, I think, the main lessons are to not take the pass when things open up, and to also make those pass by applying for things. Yeah.
I guess that in some ways answers my last question, which was, what would you say to aspiring leaders? And I guess it's take those opportunities, but is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, be bold. The other thing is, and the other is, and you and I talked about this very early on in the conversation, a good leader, in my view, surrounds themselves with people that hopefully are smarter than themselves, who can actually provide great advice, can really lean into the work and help move the mission forward. And so I think that's the other thing, is to not feel like you need to know it all, but what you need to do is cultivate a team, so that you have people working with you who really can provide that expertise, advice, etc., and then take it. I mean, listen to your team, take that advice, think about, and ultimately it is for a leader to make a decision. But I think that's also very, very important, especially right now, especially in the environments of being a university president. You cannot, the job is so different than it used to be. It's not just an academic leader. You're leading, a multi-million-dollar enterprise with thousands of faculty and staff, and, infrastructure, and, you name it, cybersecurity, you name it. And so you can't know it all, and nor should you.
Right on. Well, thank you. Time has flown by here. I've worked through my questions, and you've said a lot that I think is really useful. Anything you want to add, or you feel you haven't said, or anything at this moment before you go on to your next meeting and important decision?
There's always a next meeting, Noreen,
Yeah.
you should know that. No, this has really been a pleasure. I always enjoy these conversations because they also help you reflect on,
Right.
on what matters most. So I want to thank you for your questions. I'm very thoughtful, enjoyed.
Well, terrific. Thank you so much. And what I'm always interested in having a conversation with a senior leader about where students are, because students often, in the busy world, as you say, managing a big physical plant, paradoxically get lost in
And
part of those conversations.
and they should be at the center of a university.
Absolutely.
Got it. Totally agree. 100%.
Thank you so much. Good luck with everything else in your day and the rest of your term, of course, and enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Noreen. It was lovely speaking with you today.
Visit studiosity.com/Students First for information on the next Students First Symposium, an open forum for faculty, staff, and academics to candidly discuss and progress the issues that matter most in higher education.